Right, so, we'll get started on the Citizens' War Memorial. I think there'll be a number of questions that people will have, but we'll adjourn for morning tea probably in about 10 minutes or so. Thank you very much. So I don't know whether you want to begin with a bit of a presentation.
There's a fair bit of information in the report. There's a lot of attachments which you've all got. I guess the key points here, and listening to the discussions, and also remembering that back quite some time ago, the RSA also came and did an equally passionate presentation to council. And so, I mean, I guess the issue here is that the City Council are the guardians of the Citizens' War Memorial. Custodian, I think. Guardians or custodians? So the
looks after it.
Well, no. Well, I mean that was my question, yes. Wasn't it? The ownership. So my reading of all of the documents that we've been provided is that we are the custodian for maintenance, essentially, but that once the trust was wound up, essentially the memorial became part of the cathedral precinct, is the reading in the document. But it
yes.
didn't say that the ownership transferred to us, or that guardianship did, which has a technical term. We're custodians for maintenance under the resolution that was passed by council a squillion years ago. I don't think you were on it then, Vicky. No, that's not even going to get a laugh. You know, so I'm just, I mean, that's sort of my question really, is that I don't know that we can legally make this decision. Well, Brent might be the one to answer this, absent a direction from the CPT.
The owner of, I agree with you, Mayor, the owner of the memorial is the owner of the land. And that's the result of the content of the deed between the parties, where it's expressly stated, as you say, that if the association was wound up, then the ownership of the memorial passes to the trustees, the owners of the land. So they are the owners of it. And I agree with you again that the role of the council is as caretaker, not as owner. Now, in actual fact though, all the parties treat it as being the property of the council. If the council wants it to be formally at law the council's property, it can be an easy piece of paperwork to transfer ownership formally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we've never made that as a decision of the council.
Correct.
I mean, it's just, I mean, this really didn't occur to me until we were getting representations from the heritage groups. And I started to ask myself the question, because the question I've always asked, well, if the CPT directed us to move it, we would be legally obliged to. Correct. But actually, would we be legally obliged to? As I understand it, the money that was held on trust, that was transferred at the time, which we drew down on for maintenance for a period of time, and I presume that that's now exhausted, but I haven't had a specific, I don't specifically know that it was closed down, but there was, I think, actually it seems quite a ridiculous amount, but then so did the amount they fundraised, you know, £10,000. I wish that's all it costs now. But I think it was something like £500, but that was for the purposes of moving it if it needed to be moved, as well as providing for its maintenance. So I mean, it was almost like it was a surety, you know, that was provided in advance of something perhaps happening that required it to be moved.
Yeah, yes, you're correct, and they've quite adequately covered themselves by other clauses in the deed saying no expense of any kind shall fall upon the chapter or the church property trustees in connection with the memorial, even though they now become owners. And that if at any time in the future the land be required for cathedral purposes, the memorial shall be removed without expense to the chapter. So the deed was very carefully put together, I would say. But yes, we are custodians, and that's as per the council resolution back in, what's this letter, 1989. And we've been maintaining it ever since.
Yeah, Tim. Oh, well, there's going to be lots of questions, so we'll just
Go around the table.
yeah. Who's all got questions? No, we'll go around the table because it's So if we start with Tim and down.
Thank you. I've got a number of questions. The first one is, what would happen if we turn around and say, well, actually no, if the church property trust want it shifted, then and they instruct us to, why don't we do that? Because we've already put ratepayers, $10 million of ratepayers' money into the cathedral, and let's be honest, the cost of perhaps shifting it will be, what we're saying, between 1.5 and 2 million, which will fall on the ratepayers of Christchurch.
No.
That was the worst case scenario.
It's not going to come out of thin air. So
Yeah.
No, the government's providing channels for that.
Yeah.
are they?
It's in the paper, yeah.
And the 1.5 to 2 million was the scenario where if you tried to pick up the whole mound that it sits on and shift it.
That's the most expensive one that made the headline.
But in the staff recommendations, under 2.1, in fact, it just seems that all this is aiming at shifting. So, for instance, 2.1, council agrees to seek the community's views on and then determines which of the 3 alternative sites proposed, Latimer Square, Cranmer, or elsewhere in Cathedral Square. So, technically, there's not a 4th one, which is saying keep it where it is.
Under the first recommendation,
Yeah.
that's where it's asking you. So if you say no, then item 2.
Item 2 disappears. We don't go out for consultation.
And say if the church property trust want it shifted, then they can instruct us, and then we look at this.
Yes, you could do that.
Right.
Whether or not the other parties through government will still be around at that time, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there is an option for government funding at this stage. But Brent, can we legally make a decision to move something we don't own?
There has been a letter go to the council, hasn't there, from the church property trustees, saying that the structure is going to impede their work on the cathedral. So whilst the letter doesn't say we instruct you to move it, it is very close to doing that.
Yeah, but if it did go that step further, then we wouldn't have a choice. But is it, and we wouldn't be liable for it?
Well, arguably, because just going back to the discussion we were having before.
Or does this make us, does this actually make us an owner by default if we actually accede to a request when it's made?
That doesn't necessarily make us the owner, but the course of conduct between the parties over the years has been akin to the council being the owner. Yes, formally at law, the memorial, as a result of the deed, belongs to the owner of the land.
Right.
But the council's activity over the years has been that of a landowner. Has been that of an owner of the memorial because of the care and upkeep that it's put into it.
Okay, so perhaps the request to move it should have been directed to the CPT, if not instead of, at least as well as the council.
The CPT have a number of times been asked whether they would like to put in writing, asking council to move it, and the strongest wording they provided was what's in the attachment.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm just questioning whether it's sufficient.
My last
question.
No,
Tim. Yeah.
With
sorry.
regards to a resource consent or instructing the reconstruction company through the CPT, with regards to protecting and taking all reasonable steps to protect the historic place, site or item which is on or adjacent to a work site is not unusual.
Correct.
So
Yes.
therefore, their letter to us is merely a request which we can actually look at. We do not have to, and we're not obligated to take up.
Correct.
Thank you.
Aaron?
Yeah, mine's one you may or may not be able to answer. It's just around the RSA services that were held there prior to the earthquakes. They were always held at that site. Why was that the site and not, given that's the Citizens Memorial, and not at the Bridge of Remembrance, which is the War Memorial? Do you know that?
I can't answer that. Some recent, even prior to those memorials, there was some recent discovery of documents the RSA made. The services were actually held in Kremlin Square,
Right.
prior to the memorials being built. But I'm not sure as why it was shifted. RSA might be able to answer that.
Yeah, well, we can direct that. I mean, we can't direct it today, but we can find out the answer to that. Phil?
Thank you. My question's around the costs if the memorial stays where it is, because the church property trustees in their letter, they indicate that there will be higher costs, or costs would increase. Have they or anyone given us any estimate of the cost of it staying where it is in terms of the cost for the cathedral restoration?
No, they haven't costed that out. I know that Lynn's earlier on had set aside some funding for that similar wall type protection that goes around the rest of the precinct. Whether that's enough, I don't know, because the type of protection you will need, because it's such a tall structure, maybe more than that. I guess they're waiting for an answer before they go into detailed design to find out what sort of temporary protection measures are required. So
Right, so I've skipped over the absent chair by accident. I just didn't notice him put his hand up. So Glenn Livingston, would you like to ask your question now?
Okay.
This will come from the
Yes. Thank you, Leanne. Sorry, just one or two technical issues. Thanks, Brent, for obviously for the report. I guess my question is why the cenotaph, given that when you, for instance, look at a top-down view of the whole site, and that the rationale for this is access for restoration, you know, you could ask the same question, for instance, of, say, the visitor centre or the trees or constraints of the road. So have you heard any other, or are you aware of any other requests to potentially move anything else in order to effect restoration?
no, I haven't had any other requests. The only other work that's really been done is I guess the regeneration plan for Cathedral Square. Many of the items stay on that, but no, I haven't had any other. I'm not aware of any other request regarding the cenotaph.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
I had one more question around the ownership thing. Legally, the church now owns it, so how can the church then, or the church property trusts, demand us to move it? So, you know, a lot of the pretense has been that they're going to instruct us to move it because it needs to be moved potentially from their point of view, but actually we don't own it. As you've just said, the deed, they own it, so is that actually the case?
Yeah,
Legally?
it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because they are the owner of it, but the course of dealing between the parties I was describing before, the council performs the duties of the landowner, of the owner of the memorial. The council looks after it.
Yeah,
The council maintains it. The council puts its own money into doing that. The community treats it as being a council-owned piece of property.
Yeah, I mean, this is another perception and reality issue, but I mean, black and white, they technically can't demand the council move it, can they?
Correct.
Okay, go.
Pauline?
Yeah, I'm just struggling with number one a little bit. Should that be voted against, would we be required to perhaps add an amendment to say that we would, well, I mean, to understand that we don't have enough information to actually vote against one because we do not know how much it will cost and if it's viable to protect it. Even though we had deputations this morning claiming really quite strongly that they were quite convinced that it would be able to be protected, we don't have that information strongly in the report.
Yes, and currently in this report, the costs aren't on council anyway. So it's not going to cost council. It's being funded through other means. So the costs in the report that are indicated, it also says there that the costs aren't on council. So in terms of making the decision, you're not you're not putting council in a position where there might be an open-ended process, for example. But as I said before, the cost of protection can't really be done until you know what the terms of the consent might be. Yeah.
Have you got a feeling whether the protecting it would be on par with moving it?
No, I have no idea.
No idea.
No.
Thank you.
Andrew?
Thank you, and I've got a couple of questions, really just seeking clarification. So, paragraph 5.63 of the report talks about funding being available from other agencies, and this has been referred to a couple of times in answers to questions already. What level of confidence that we have that whatever the costs of this there are, that council will not be left funding this from rates? I mean, to say that we expect funding's available, to say that we expect other agencies will cover the cost of it, that's great, that's an expectation. But is there a scenario that could roll out from here where we make the decision to move it, and therefore because we made that decision and other funding doesn't end up covering the whole cost, we end up wearing some of it?
If the council decides that it should be shifted, the lead agency in terms of the shift would be LINZ. So the funding, we made it very clear right from the start that any council funding, we do have some funding for the Citizens War Memorial, but that is for restoration and earthquake repairs only, and that would be for looking after especially the bronzes and bits and pieces. So we've made it very clear that there is no council funding or potential for council funding for any of this.
Yeah, so if we were to pass these resolutions today, if we were, that's on the basis that we have no funding available other than that which is already there for maintenance for this project.
That's correct.
Okay. Coming back to the legalities of the agreement, and bearing in mind that the agreement was between the Church Property Trustees and the Christchurch War Memorial Association, which now no longer exists, presumably that agreement, in as much as there's only one party to it, is not valid. It's essentially, from what we've heard this morning, an agreement between the Church Property Trustees and the owner of the memorial. So it's essentially a set of principles between the church and itself.
Yes.
Thank you.
I just want to clarify. So, from my reading, the RSA, the Church Heritage New Zealand, Heritage New Zealand, the Church Properties people are all supportive of it being moved.
Correct.
So, given that level of interest, has there been an indication that people are also prepared to fund in some way? Has that been discussed at all?
There has been discussions around funding, and even as part, I think I saw a statement the other day from RSA about trying to access the fund that was set up for the 100-year celebration as well. So there's opportunities there that have been talked about, but it's all through other agencies, not through council.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think it's actually important that we, I guess, establish the actual ownership of the memorial before we even consult. But I guess my question's more around whether we can put in the consultation about actually leaving it in its current position. Instead of making the decision now to move it, actually consult on whether we should leave it where it is or move it.
Yeah, that creates the dilemma of going
Being
out and
directed.
consulting as to whether to shift it or not, and then still having church property trustees come back and say shift it anyway. So you've just then, you're in a position where you've
So I
one
guess
says
it's a
yes and one
sequence
says
of
no.
the process and where everything should sit.
Ref and then Dion. Oh, sorry, Ref, Sarah. Sorry, I thought I asked people to put up their hands if they wanted. No, I said I'd go round the table in order of people put, anyway.
That was what Mike asked was what I was going to ask.
Right.
Part one, but the main thing is there's not enough information in here on actually the protection costs and how that would be done, because I'm not sure whether we're moving this because the RSA wants it moved to a new site, because that's where they want it in Cranham Square, or is the worry that it might get damaged. I don't really see that you shouldn't be able to protect something like that. It's quite a way, away from the church, so I'm not quite sure whether we're moving it because it needs to be moved, or we're moving it because it's going to get broken, given that actually the moving process looks quite worrying in terms of dismantling this thing. This thing looks like the most solid thing in the city.
I think
worry a bit about it.
I think that from the reading of the papers, and in particular the Heritage New Zealand statement in support, was the concern about whether it could be sufficiently protected. Is that am I?
That is correct, and also to answer another part of the question, if you go back to the RSA's original deputation to council, they talked about it wasn't just about protecting it from damage, it was also giving it its own sense of place and having more room for celebrations and that kind of thing as well. So all of those reasons are also in the Church Property Trustees letter, which is also attached. It's not just about the risk and the protection to it and the damage. It's also about their land, wanting to use their land as well. So there's a number of issues there. It's not just about it's in risk of damage. But anyway, Sarah and then Dion.
Thanks. Just quickly, if we decide not to do this now, and we don't go through the whole do we move it, do we not move it consultation, and if so, where, which leaves us open to horrible public perception should we be then asked to move it. If we don't do this now and we wait till we are directed and then we consult, is that a better process? So then we consult on where, once we're directed, then we consult on where we move it to because we've been directed, or whether we remove it, hold it in storage and reinstate it on site to enhance the heritage values of both once the reinstatement of the cathedral is done.
Yeah, I guess there's a couple of risks there. The first one is if you removed it, held it, and then wanted to put it back, the church property trustees may not grant you permission to put it back.
But that would be part of a next process. That would be part of the whole discussion that we'd have if we chose to consult and we talked to the church property trust if that was an option and those kinds of things.
That's correct, yeah.
But we could do that after we've been directed.
And the only other risk is that any funding that may have been put aside by other agencies may not be there at the time. That would be the only risk that I could see about that course of action.
Yeah.
Dion.
I'm struggling a little bit here because I don't think we can actually make a decision. We don't own it. We technically don't own it. So we can't be instructed to move it either, technically. So, I mean, I think we actually need to go, probably lay this on the table and actually go back to the property trustees and actually have a conversation with them. Also asking to think about the clarity of the funding available for the protection of it, because if there's funding available to move it, those same funders might be actually keen to talk
This
about...
is a question to staff, or are you questioning me
well,
now?
I'm actually questioning you about the whole paper in general. I think
No,
that's,
no, no.
that's-
Well, no, but I mean, I just actually said to the Chief Executive, we may have to leave this lie on the table for the simple reason that we probably need a decision made about the ownership. So,
I think we need to do that first.
and there is a very specific issue, which is around the ownership of the land, which is why I'm totally against the idea of consulting on whether to move it or not, because you do that and we get to a process, everyone says, no, leave it where it is, and then we're directed to move it. I mean, it just, there would be no credibility in the
But at this
process
point,
whatsoever.
we've just been told
We
we
don't
can't
have the
necessarily.
say at the end of the day if we're directed.
Well, we just... No, we just...
Yeah, and it may well be that, I mean, isn't it better to have a proper discussion about legal ownership?
Yes.
I mean, this was we've heard all the submissions. This was initiated by a citizens' community group that was established for this purpose. The location was a specific part of what they were doing. And the other thing was that both the City Council and the RSA opposed it, both them. So, you know, we talk about ourselves as kind of, you know, representatives in this regard, but perhaps it might be better to find another way of actually ensuring the future status of this. And it may well be that I don't want to get to a situation where the true owners make a direction ahead of who would you direct it to if you haven't actually got an owner.
That's right.
And
it's what we need to discuss first, I think, before we can make a decision.
Hey? Well, it's kind of anything goes about. Oh, Sarah, you had her hand up.
Just one quick last legal one. So I would think that, being that we've been very clear that we don't know enough about the ownership, if we went ahead today and did make a decision to consult to move it, it's been very clear in the past that heritage advocates are pretty passionate about what goes on in the square and have taken legal action in the past, and this would be a basis for some legal action to stop it happening.
Oh, there's always the possibility of there being legal action to review a council decision, judicial review in the High Court.
Yeah.
But just picking up on one of your comments, Councillor, that there's uncertainty over ownership. That's apologies if that's the impression that you've got from what I've said in the report. I don't think that's the case. I don't think there's uncertainty. I think there is certainty about ownership. The ownership rests with the owner of the land.
Okay.
I think that's relatively clear from the deed that the parties entered. Now, where we've been talking about the risk of there being a direction from the church property trustees to the council to move it, and
it wouldn't be to council,
and the fact that whether it's possible to make a direction to the council to move something that the council doesn't actually own.
Yep.
Now, the legal situation, as I say, is that the council doesn't actually own it. But if the council was to be asked to move it because it's at risk of being damaged in the cathedral repair, and the council says, no, I'm not going to move it, it's not mine, it's your problem, I wonder whether that's a perfect position for the council to be in, to disclaim responsibility or care.
Yeah, but is it a custodian role? You know, so in the role of custodian, could we be asked to move it?
But
Yeah, and could we legally consider that in our role as custodian?
I'm sure we could.
Yeah.
Yes.
Can we do that? Can we do that though ahead of direction from the owner if we're just the custodian?
No, probably not.
I wouldn't think so. I would think that as custodian, the owner would have to tell us to
Look,
do something.
this is, you know, I know that people are sort of warming to this issue, but you know, this was an important set of documents to bring together, and this is an important part of a very public conversation that we need to have as a city. You know, and you know, I mean, I know everyone dots their I's and crosses their T's and are fearful of people diving off to court and, you know, getting injunctions and left, right and centre. We have two pieces of legislation that cover this particular part of our city at the moment. One is specifically for the Greater Christchurch for the Christchurch Cathedral reinstatement, and the other one for the Greater Christchurch regeneration. And either or both of those, as the paper says, could be employed to provide some support for decisions being made that will be subject to public consultation, but not to appeals other than on points of law. So that's the process matter. But I think that the RSA brought this to us. I think they brought it to the church property trustees as well. We've spoken to the church property trustees. We've asked them for a direction. They haven't quite come over the line. This was the strongest letter that we received from them. And even with a direction, I think that the question of ownership needs to be a public conversation. So I am of the view to leave this matter lie on the table for some additional work. But in so doing, I want to thank everyone that's put so much hard work into the documentation, and I've struggled with the ownership issue at the end of the day, and the legal liabilities that lie with that as a custodian. And the thing is that it is the most precious of things, and it is so sad that the council of the day was so unsupportive, and I'm sure the RSA members today feel the same about the RSA of the time, being unsupportive of what is the most magnificent cenotaph that was designed for its location. So it's but I think that to have a public education about what the status is, we're in a position to do that. But until we receive a direction from the church property trustees, I don't know that it's a matter that we need to, we should even consider. And the other thing is that I wonder whether, in the meantime, we should talk about whether whether central government can use its current powers or to give certainty to the outcome, because the last thing that you'd want to do is to make a decision to move something temporarily and then not be allowed to put it back. So I'm just sort of kind of looking over at Mary, who I know leads the team that's done all this hard work on this matter, and yeah, I know, but I'm sort of, I don't want to sort of say, will this be disappointing to you, Brent, but
I've got plenty of other work to do. I guess we do need some sort of clear direction as to what you want us to do. Do you want us to go away and clarify that whole ownership, custodial responsibility thing and come back to you?
Well, I'm just wondering whether it needs a sort of almost a tripartite conversation with yourselves, well, more than tripartite, the RSA, the heritage groups, and potentially the CPT.
Yeah, I mean, all of those groups have been involved in meetings over the last year. And that's where a lot of these issues have been raised. But yep, it's something that certainly, from the discussion today, certainly needs to be clarified, so that council knows whether it can make a decision. And
it's almost like, what is the alternative? Because I almost don't want us to get into a brinkmanship situation either, because it's so magnificent that we don't want to be. I think we want the general public to understand the issues, and often in these, the sort of the times of the 10-second soundbite and the clickbait approach to coverage on social media, it's hard to express just how precious this item is, and its history and what it means, and
Absolutely.
how it got to where it's got to, and what the decision might mean either which way. But I do think we need to have some better advice from CPT, or even the group that's been set up with the government, about the reinstatement and what the costs and the risks to the actual memorial are, because I almost can't believe that they didn't consider that when they were considering the reinstatement question,
Yes.
because they knew that it was there.
Yes.
So, so perhaps a little bit more diving into that area.
Sure. And we'll see what we can do in terms of the custodial
Yeah.
versus ownership.
Pauline, did you have another question?
I know, with the church property trust being actually, if you like, the legal owner, because it sits on their land, they could actually effectively make this decision without us, surely. And wouldn't we be best to actually initiate transferring that or solidifying that ownership into council, which you said you could probably do that quite easily? Wouldn't
Yeah,
it be best to go down that track?
that may be the right thing to do, but that's one of the pieces of advice that we need to come back to, is
Sure.
you know, the sorting out the ownership issue in a way that actually gives security around its location, because you can't have an owner of such a precious piece of our heritage, you know, in a way that you can't have control over it staying where it is. I mean, you can't. I mean, it's just not right. So maybe this is the opportunity to sort something.
Yeah, and that's the dilemma that I guess the deed, we're faced with the deed, because the original association no longer exists. You have a trustee that's an owner, but in the same document saying, but if we want you to get it off our land, you've got to get it off our land, but now he has no one to direct that to, other than us as the custodian. So
But has this all been discussed in the working party?
No, it was based on some earlier conversations around council being the custodian and then being the landowner. It was I guess assumed.
Yeah.
That work
No,
on
look,
behalf of the citizens.
There's no criticism or blame around this. I think it's it's an interesting piece of our history, and I'm really glad that people are getting to understand it in this way. But I think we should leave this lie on the table, and I'm just wondering how long. You've got some wording there. So some wording for a resolution is that the council leave the report to lie on the table until a future meeting to enable additional information and advice to be provided. So I'm prepared to move that. Do I have a seconder? Mike Davidson. So I will put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Who's a no? Anne Galloway. So look,